Welcome to Davis Malm. We're going to be covering a range of interesting topics that I hope will be informative and interesting to you.
So I am here to talk about politics in the workplace, and basically what I'm going to be telling you is that probably the best place to be to get away from the politics and get a break would be the workplace. The survey data that people have spit out there, or some of it anyway, is that there's a lot of people that talk about and engage in political discussions at the workplace, but apparently there are a number of people that aren't comfortable with it and don't like it. You've got many people regretting having political discussions. Some feel it hurts the work environment having political discussions, and some people think that the more it happens and occurs, it's going to make it very uncomfortable. So there's a good reason for employers to eliminate political discussions in the workplace, which can be done. And some of the issues that arise from it is a lack of productivity, a loss of attention and focus of the employees. It can harm morale and relationships, particularly given the way it seems to be today. It can also harm customer relations to the extent there's discussions that customers overhear or get involved in. And it can implicate numerous labor and employment laws, which could create some difficulties in the workplace or potentially create claims arising from those discussions. There is no First Amendment right to engage in political discussions in the workplace. So free speech applies only really to government action. If you're obviously working for a public employer, you've got different issues. But for a private workplace, you can eliminate and prohibit political discussions. They have no constitutional right to that type of expression. However, you also don't have any right to displaying the campaign paraphernalia. So Trump signs, Biden signs, Harris signs, you can't be putting that stuff up. And you can prohibit all of that. You can't solicit campaign contributions. If you want to prohibit that, you can. And wearing even campaign buttons, you can prohibit that. And that will all work and help try to keep more productivity and calm in the workplace. What's the risk to doing all that? The risk to doing all that is, one, you don't equally enforce the restrictions if you have those restrictions. If you don't, then that could lead to claims of discrimination, harassment, or retaliation. In addition, that political discussions can implicate certain issues of race, gender, and religious beliefs. So if a supervisor expresses support for a candidate, position on those types of areas of discussion, abortion, immigration, gender pay, equality, it could also lead to claims of discrimination. So those are all reasons that you may want to seriously consider limiting it because it can prevent further claims from arising, which otherwise wouldn't be there if you're not having these types of discussions. The one thing you got to be careful about is the National Labor Relations Act type activities. Those are still protected, so you cannot prohibit those. And what those generally entail is employees have rights to communicate about issues in the workplace, wages, hours, terms and conditions of employment, benefits, that type of thing. So you got to be careful not to do that. And that's where you may have some decisions to make when there are some prohibitions that you put in place on discussing political speech. For instance, there could be discussion about discrimination in the workplace or wage increases. If it's tied to the political campaigns of an individual, that could be restricted. You can't restrict them from discussing, we need policies, or there's too much discrimination going on in this area, or we should have our wages increased. If an employee wrote up a sign that said, "Vote for Smith, protect our wages," that might be able to stay up and put that on his cubicle. That's going to be a closer call. Whereas if he put a Trump sign or a Harris sign and made some statement, it's a campaign type paraphernalia, that could probably be more required to be removed. The other thing you got to watch is trying to limit discussions during non-work time or in non-work areas. Those also you would have to be careful not to make your policies that broad that they would cover those. There are also some limited state law exceptions. In Massachusetts, an employer is prohibited from taking adverse actions against employees or promising more favorable terms to influence employees' votes or political contributions. Other states' laws, which I'm not going to cover, they're too numerous, and I think most of us are operating in Massachusetts, also have certain rights related to political discourse. So if you do have offices in other locations, we'd have to key on those states and see what, if anything, exists. So what are some actions that we would recommend you take as an employer? One would be implement a written policy. Prohibit and restrict political discussion and expression. Tie the restriction to conduct that harms productivity or impacts customer relations, things that relate to the legitimate employer interests. Include a carve-out in the policy for those NLRA rights that I mentioned that allow for discussion of wages and anti-discrimination, that type of thing. And then train your managers on what's acceptable and what's not. Yes?
Do you specifically have to call out political discussion, or can you just put it into general, like derogatory?
I think you'd put it in general terms about political discussions, political candidates, who to vote for and why, and then have your caveat, you know, this does not impact your rights under Section 7 NLRA to discuss, and then give those, you could give some examples of what the things are can be discussed. So that way it's protected. And you can point to that to say this is not intended to limit those. You also want to make sure that if you do implement these policies that you consistently enforce them in all circumstances so that everybody's treated equally. You want to remind your employees about your other policies that cover anti-discrimination, harassment, retaliation, social media, because sometimes those get tied in with this political discussion and people going overboard. So you've got that caution also to keep people in check and try to limit the types of activities. Massachusetts provides to, employers should provide employees 2 hours after the polls open to go and vote. Does not have to be paid leave to do that. And you want them to ask for it in advance. They're supposed to ask for it in advance. Not everybody does it that strictly, but just so you know, they are entitled to go and vote for 2 hours right after the polls open.
So you mentioned social media policies there. So how can that tie in if someone's out in their social media and they're touting, political things that might?
Yeah, so the social media policy would be the use of firm facilities, computers, website, any of that for social media. If somebody's at home and they have their own Facebook page, you can't do anything like that. What we have advised, depending on the level of the employee, some companies might suggest or encourage a high-level executive employee to state on their Facebook page that this is my own personal view and it's not the view of company X or company Y. But other than that, if somebody's doing their own thing at home, no. It's really your limit. Social media policy is to limit the use of the equipment and facilities of the workplace.